It's 7 p.m. Friday, August 30th, here in Seoul.
Coming up on News Center tonight. With only a few months left until South Korea hosts a big multilateral summit, President Moon Jae-in says it'll be meaningful if North Korean leader Kim Jong-un attended the event. But he says progress on denuclearization must come first.
The Bank of Korea keeps its key interest rates steady for now, but hints at a future cut, possibly by year's end. The central bank says it's waiting to see how trade tensions both at home and abroad will impact the economy.
Culture ministers of South Korea, China, and Japan agree to cooperate in cultural programs, especially for younger generations. In separate talks, the ministers from Seoul and Tokyo, putting aside diplomatic tensions, also decide to boost cultural exchanges.
And a mass protest in Hong Kong scheduled for Saturday has been called off after organisers failed to get government approval. Public anger is likely to grow even further after police arrest several high-profile activists. NEWSCENTER begins now. Good evening and welcome to Arirang News Center, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Noaram.
And I'm Han Daeun. Welcome to the program. South Korea will be hosting a multilateral summit this November focused on its relations with Southeast Asian countries. And there's been talk of an invitation going out to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
President Moon Jae-in said his attendance would be, quote, very meaningful, but noted that progress on denuclearization must come first. Our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min starts us off.
South Korea's presidential office has expressed its openness to possibly inviting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to the Korea-ASEAN special summit that will be held in South Korea's southeastern port city of Busan in November. In a written interview with the Bangkok Post ahead of his week-long trip to 3 Southeast Asian nations from Sunday, President Moon said Kim's attendance would be very meaningful for peace on the Korean Peninsula and in East Asia. But he added that any decision on the matter would depend on progress made in the Korean peace process and the nuclear talks between North Korea and the U.S. What matters most, he said, is for the regime to actually put denuclearization into concrete action. He suggested ASEAN play a key role in urging North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program and to stand together through economic cooperation. That idea of inviting Kim Jong-un to South Korea was first raised last year by Indonesian President Joko Widodo and was quickly endorsed by a number of regional leaders.
북한이 비핵화 조치를 진정성 있게 실천해 나갈 경우 아세안이 운영 중인 여러 회의체에 북한을 참여시키고 북한과의 양자교류 협력이 강화되길 바랍니다.
Touching on the sudden uptick in Seoul-Tokyo tensions, President Moon said he's ready to embrace and cooperate with Japan should it decide to return to the negotiating table. He highlighted how Japan's trade measures not only damage South Korea, but the global economy as a whole. He said ASEAN members should do what they can to steer Japan to the path of dialogue and diplomatic consultation. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The annual meeting of culture and tourism ministers from South Korea, China, and Japan took place in Korea's western port city of Incheon today. The ministers agreed to further develop cultural exchanges and expand tourism cooperation between all 3 countries. Our Kan Young-woo has the story.
The tourism ministers of South Korea, China, and Japan have vowed to redouble their efforts to bring peace, stability, and prosperity in Northeast Asia through tourism exchanges and cooperation. Adopting a joint declaration, the 3 tourism ministers, South Korea's Park Yang-woo, China's Ro Soo-gang, and Japan's Keiichi Ishii, pledged to work together to promote local tourism and lead the future of the tourism industry. Also earlier in the day, the culture ministers of the 3 nations held a separate meeting and signed the Incheon Declaration, which dedicates more focus on the future generations and emphasizes the role of culture in the 4th Industrial Revolution. Following the signing ceremony, South Korea's Suncheon, China's Yangzhou, and Japan's Kitakyushu have been named as the 2020 East Asian Culture Cities, which will be working with one another to boost cultural exchanges. But in between the two ministerial level meetings, a local civic group held a protest in front of the meeting venue. The protesters called for a boycott of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics over concerns of radioactive contamination. They delivered its petition to a Japanese official and called upon Tokyo to halt its, quote, economic retaliation measures against South Korea. But according to a South Korean ministry official, the ministers of Seoul and Tokyo implicitly agreed to put aside matters like the ongoing trade disputes, wartime forced labor, comfort women issue, and the end of a military intelligence sharing pact between the two nations. The worsening relationship between Seoul and Tokyo was not brought up during the ministerial level talks here at the Songdo Convention. Instead, they focused on ways to promote cultural exchanges and tourism cooperation between South Korea, China, and Japan. 간영우, Arirang News, Songdo.
South Korea's National Security Council has agreed to push actively for the early return of 26 U.S. military bases in the country. Chaired by Security Chief Chung Eui-yong, the NSC's Standing Committee agreed to try and speed up the return of these sites, which are or will be vacant. U.S. forces have been moving largely to a refurbished base in the city of Pyeongtaek. For the base at Yongsan in central Seoul, the NSC agreed it would start the process by the end of this year. The council also examined the state of relations between Seoul and Tokyo and agreed to continue working to get Japan to roll back its trade restrictions. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon is set to meet with a former Japanese chief cabinet secretary to discuss the troubled relations between Seoul and Tokyo. According to NHK, the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's Takeo Kawamura will make a 4-day visit to South Korea from Saturday to attend a cultural exchange event between the two countries on Sunday. The Prime Minister's office said Friday that Prime Minister Lee and Kawamura agreed on a meeting in the coming days, but the details included the date and venue have not been decided. On Monday, Kawamura will also meet ruling Democratic Party lawmaker Kang Chang-il, who represents Seoul in the South Korea-Japan Parliamentarians Union, a group of lawmakers promoting friendly ties between the two countries.
Japan has approved the export of etching gas to South Korea, a key component needed to make semiconductors. It is the first time Tokyo has given the green light to the material's export since imposing trade restrictions back in July. However, the Korean government says Japan's move does not signify a change in stance regarding the two countries' ongoing trade war. Our Son Kyung has this report.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced on Thursday that Japan has approved the first shipment of etching gas to South Korea since it began restricting the export of 3 high-tech materials to the country on July 4th. The etching gas was reportedly ordered by Samsung Electronics, although the exact amount was not confirmed. Etching gas is a key material for fabricating semiconductor circuits, and Japanese suppliers account for more than 70% of the global market for etching gas with 99% purity. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry refused to confirm whether Tokyo gave its green light to the shipment. Meanwhile, the Seoul government said a single approval does not indicate a change in Tokyo's stance, and that Korea continues to seek a complete retraction of Japan's export curbs. Prior to this latest shipment, Japan had also approved the export of photoresist to South Korea on August 7th and 19th.
For Japan, it was necessary to show that the export ban does not violate WTO rules. Also, it would be burdensome for the country to face international criticism if Seoul's semiconductor industry is damaged by its actions.
Lee added that since about 90% of Japan's etching gas exports are consumed by South Korea, some Japanese firms could be at risk of bankruptcy if Tokyo stays on its current course. Therefore, Japan may be calibrating its actions to minimize the damage to its own economy and avoid domestic backlash at home. 서은경, Arirang News.
Despite the tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, the New York Times reports that overall relations, especially in terms of business, will likely endure these trying times and come out the other end relatively intact. Lee Seung-jae has more.
South Korea-Japan relations are at their lowest point in recent memory, following Tokyo's move to formally remove Seoul from its whitelist of trusted trading partners. despite South Koreans boycotting Japanese goods en masse and switching up their travel plans to avoid Japan. When it comes to bilateral business ties, they would be a lot more difficult to break. This is the view of the New York Times on Wednesday, U.S. time. According to its report, trade volume between the two neighbors currently amounts to about $85 billion a year. It added that Japan, in particular, holds considerable sway as the main supplier of essential raw materials and components that South Korea needs in its high-tech economic machine. The report quoted Rory Green, an economist who specializes in South Korea and China at the London-based analyst T.S. Lombard, as saying any serious attempt to shatter trade ties would be a disaster, adding that until South Korea is able to produce its own materials, a process that could take many years, the two countries have little choice but to stick together. The report went on to use South Korean firm Haejin Tech as an example. It builds intricate machines with over 1,300 parts for packaging foods like soup and kimchi. While many of its components are made domestically, some can only be sourced from Japan. However, it noted the sudden upswing in trade tensions between Seoul and Tokyo has left many small businesses in South Korea unprepared. Many experts seem to agree that while the trade conflict has left the two countries deeply at odds, the two are bound to each other whether they like it or not, and need to find a way to resolve their current issues. 이승재, Arirang News.
Japanese low-cost carrier Peach Aviation is set to suspend routes connecting South Korea and Japan as rising tensions between the two countries have led to a lack of demand from South Korean tourists. The budget arm of ANA Holdings says it's cancelling its route from New Chitose Airport in Hokkaido to Incheon Airport from October 28th and flights between Osaka and Busan from January 7th next year. The route connecting Naha and Okinawa and Incheon will be temporarily paused from January 28th to February 22nd. The suspension will make Peach the first Japanese carrier to scale back services to South Korea. 8 South Korean carriers have already announced reduced services to Japan. As widely expected, South Korea's central bank has decided to freeze its key interest rate, but has hinted at a future cut. Our Kim Hye-sung has more.
The Bank of Korea on Friday kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 1.5%. This comes after the bank cut rates last month for the first time in 3 years. The central bank said geopolitical risks such as a possible no-deal Brexit and global uncertainties, including the ongoing U.S.-China trade spat and Japan's export restrictions on Korea, are continuing to weigh on the local economy.
We cut 25 basis points last month on concerns over growing downside risks to the Korean economy. At the current stage, we have decided to keep rates unchanged and further examine how the external environment could affect Korea's real economy and the financial market.
The BOK chief said global and domestic financial markets are seeing an increase in volatility, exacerbated by concerns of a global economic slowdown over the U.S.-China trade war. Major economies' treasury yields have fallen. The Korean won also continued to weaken, falling more than 8% against the U.S. dollar this year to more than 1,200 won against the greenback in August. Domestically, consumer sentiment is at a 31-month low this month, and headline inflation remained below 1% through July, lower than the bank's 2% target. Exports, a key driver of South Korea's domestic growth, is set to fall for the 9th consecutive month in August on lower global demand.
Construction and investment remain sluggish, and consumption is also starting to fall. The economic environment for the latter half of this year is even worse than the first half. This calls for more monetary easing, but the central bank is waiting to see the effects of the rate cut and extra budget spending.
In fact, the Bank of Korea said it will closely monitor household debt, domestic financial markets, and monetary policy in major economies before arriving at its monetary policy decisions. In Friday's meeting, 2 out of 7 board members voted for a rate cut, and markets expect the bank to cut rates in October or December this year. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
The government says it will provide what it calls a one-stop platform to support one-person media creators such as YouTubers. Lee Min-sun has the details.
South Korea's Science and ICT Ministry announced a plan at a ministerial meeting on Friday to fully support and nurture one-person media creators and foster the industry as a new growth engine. One-person media is becoming an integral part of people's daily lives due to the growing number of single-person households and the use of smart devices. The government is staking high hopes in the one-person media market, especially with the commercialization of 5G networks earlier this year. Faster networks allow simultaneous transmission of higher quality content. The market for one-person media is currently estimated at around $3 billion and is expected to be worth about $6.6 billion by 2023, according to forecasts. After conducting a feasibility study next year, the ministry will provide all-in-one support from training in content editing skills to tax and legal consultation for one-person media creators. The ministry will open training classes at 13 institutes nationwide and will create free-to-use production spaces by the end of this year. The government will also provide regular meeting opportunities for creators to better coordinate and share their ideas with one another. The ministry previously supported content co-production with overseas creators, mostly in Southeast Asia, and the new plan will encourage co-production with those from North America to help local creators gain a broader foothold in the global market. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
Online shopping in Korea continues to be on the rise, with online sales in the second quarter this year going up by double digits, and most transactions are being done using mobile devices. Yoon Jung-min reports.
A growing number of people in South Korea are using e-commerce, including online and mobile shopping.
I usually search for cosmetics and clothes with my phone. Shopping with mobile phones is convenient because I can compare prices straight away.
I can buy clothes and other things easily with my phone. I don't have to go around lots of stores, and the goods are delivered right to my door.
According to Statistics Korea, online transactions in the second quarter of this year amounted to some $27 billion, up 18% from the previous year. And mobile shopping made up nearly 64% of all online transactions. The data shows that sales for food and home appliances increased from April to June, driven by people who prefer to stay home. Fashion items and cosmetics were also popular.
The total revenue for online shopping is expected to reach more than $110 billion this year. The market is growing 20% every year. That's because of higher smartphone usage, which is around 95%, and good internet infrastructure.
The data also shows that more people traded with foreign buyers or sellers in the second quarter. People in South Korea sold goods online worth more than $1 billion to overseas buyers and also bought more than $730 million of products from overseas traders. Major traders were based in the US, the EU, China, and Japan, and various goods ranging from clothing to cosmetics were bought and sold.
With a growing number of people shopping online, e-commerce is already a large part of Koreans' everyday lives. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The number of foreigners living in South Korea reached an all-time high of 1.65 million last year, according to Statistics Korea. That's an increase of more than 11% on year. The figure represents just above 3% of the country's total population. Nearly half of them were Chinese nationals, followed by Vietnamese and Thai. Meanwhile, Korea's population topped 51 million as of last November, up less than 0.5% from the previous year. North Korea's rubber stamp parliament revealed ways to further strengthen its leaders' legal power during its second meeting of the year on Thursday, but nothing was announced about the denuclearization talks with the US. Oh Jung-hee reports.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is further cementing his already hefty grip on power. On Thursday, Pyongyang state-run Korean Central Television revealed the results of the North's rubber stamp parliament meeting held earlier in the day. It said the Supreme People's Assembly modified parts of Constitution to strengthen the authority of Kim Jong-un and the State Affairs Commission, the North Korean government's top decision-making body, which is headed by Kim. Three major changes were made. First, the chairman of the State Affairs Commission, who is Kim Jong-un, does not double as a member of the parliament. Second, Kim proclaims the Assembly's various legislation and makes the key decisions at the State Affairs Commission. Lastly, Kim can appoint or dismiss North Korea's diplomatic envoys to other countries.
Therefore, the chairman of the State Affairs Commission, who represents our country, now has a stronger legal status, and his leadership is firmly guaranteed.
Kim Jong-un is now considered completely separate from the assembly as the regime's leader only. Plus, Kim now designates overseas envoys, which in the past was done by the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly. This means even greater power in Kim's hands, adding to his status as the ceremonial leader of the state that was granted at the North's previous parliamentary session in April. Because the meeting took place amid no signs of working-level negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington, there was speculation Kim Jong-un could give a speech to clarify his stance on talks with the U.S. like he did in April. However, that did not happen as Kim didn't appear at Thursday's session. The regime's 5-year economic development plan, which is due in 2020, doesn't seem to have been covered either. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Signs of new U.S.-China trade discussions have emerged despite last week's piling of new tariffs from both sides. U.S. President Trump said Thursday that trade talks will take place at a different level on Thursday local time. Our Hong-Yu has more.
The world's two economic superpowers showed signs of easing tensions to resume bilateral trade talks. U.S. President Donald Trump, during an interview with Fox News Radio on Thursday local time, hinted of a trade talk with China at a different level. He did not elaborate nor give further details, but added he will wait and see how the event would develop. China's Commerce Ministry also said that a round of meetings with the U.S. is scheduled for September. Apart from the effective communications, the Chinese and U.S. trade delegations have maintained in between their tit-for-tat tariff threats.
China has sufficient countermeasures, but under the current circumstance, we believe the issues we should discuss are the cancellation of additional tariffs on $550 billion of Chinese goods and guarding against the continuing escalation of a trade war. The Chinese side is lodging solemn representation with the United States on this matter.
The promising developments between Washington and Beijing come ahead of September 1st, the day when new tariffs from each side were scheduled to go into effect. The U.S. had announced it would impose on Sunday 15% tariffs on more than $125 billion in Chinese imports, while China had planned on imposing the first batch of 10% tariffs on $75 billion in American goods. Hong-Yu, Arirang News.
Now to the latest on Hong Kong protests. A huge pro-democracy protest was scheduled this weekend to coincide with the anniversary of the umbrella movement a few years ago. But it's been canceled at the last minute over security concerns. Our Lee Kyung-eun has more.
Calling off the demonstration planned for Saturday, the organizers said the most important thing is public safety, both physically and legally. The police had banned the event on Thursday, saying safety could not be guaranteed. This weekend is the 5th anniversary of Beijing's rejection of universal suffrage in Hong Kong that led to the 2014 umbrella movement. Meanwhile, prominent pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong was arrested this morning, which also seemed to have contributed to the decision to cancel. According to the activist group he is a member of, Wong was pushed into a private vehicle near a subway station in the southern part of the city. The 22-year-old was the face of 2014 umbrella movement for which was imprisoned. He was released this year on June 17th, after which he joined the new protests. He is now in police custody along with 3 other high-profile activists. The latest protests have gone on for more than 80 days now, making them the longest in Hong Kong's history. Safety concerns have intensified since last week's police crackdown and the arrival of fresh troops from mainland China on Thursday. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
The world's largest martial arts competition has just kicked off in the city of Chungju, Chungcheongbuk-do province this evening with a grand opening ceremony. The 2019 Chungju World Martial Arts Masterships runs for 8 days of spectacular competition, featuring 4,000 martial arts masters and officials from more than 100 countries. The event is expected to draw top-notch athletes in 20 martial arts, including Taekwondo, Wushu, Judo, and Muay Thai. Besides the competition itself, a martial arts exhibition, an academic meeting, and a World Martial Arts Leaders Forum will also take place in the province.
Despite tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, the Korea-Japan Hanmadang Festival will be taking place in Seoul on Sunday. South Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Lee Tae-ho and Japan's Parliamentary Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs Norikazu Suzuki will be attending. Eyes will be on what the two officials will say given the current diplomatic tensions. The event has taken place every year since 2005 when Seoul and Tokyo celebrated the 40th anniversary of normalizing their relations. It has now become the biggest and oldest non-governmental event between the two nations. South Korea's industrial production and investments rebounded in July, but that doesn't mean the economy is healthy. Statistics Korea says industrial output rose 1.2% on month, mainly in cars and chemicals. Facility investment went up by around 2%, led by logistics. But there was a slight decline in the indexes calculated by Statistics Korea to measure current and future performance across the economy as a whole. South Korean tennis player Chung Hyun has made it to the third round of the US Open after a stunning comeback. He fought back from 2 sets down during Thursday's second round against Spain's 32 seed Fernando Verdasco. Chung eventually won by 3 sets in a match that lasted over 3 hours. This is the third time in as many years the Korean has made it into the third round of a Grand Slam tournament. On Sunday, the 23-year-old will face world number 2 and 3-time US Open champion Rafael Nadal. This weekend, Seoul Plaza is hosting a global cultural festival with 70 countries being represented through food and cultural performances. The Seoul Friendship Festival has been held every year since 1996. It starts on Saturday with a parade by 16 dance teams dressed in their country's traditional clothing. Visitors can also try food from around the world along the Cheonggyecheon stream. That has been your 3-minute news flash. It is that time where we take a look at Arirang's digital media content.
And Onion News is back, taking a look at the top trending stories.
Tokyo.
Today, 3 years on, the radiation levels are still very high.
조금 방사능 때문에 위험할 것 같아요.
심각성이 되게 전 세계로 많이 드러났었는데 그거를 무시하고 계속 연다는 건 좀 아니라고 생각해요.
개최를 도쿄 말고 다른 데서 했으면 좋겠다는 생각이 있습니다.
후쿠시마산 수산물이 아니라면 그건 조금 조심스럽다고 생각을 하고요. 그게 아니라면은 사실 괜찮지 않을까.
그런 올림픽이라는 큰 축제를 그런 또 후쿠시마 원전을 이미지를 좋게 만들기 위한 수단으로 쓰는 것도 아닌가 싶기도 하고.
Japan's road to recovery has become a symbol for next year's Olympics, and Fukushima has a key role.
We're expecting mild weather this weekend, but big temperature gaps will follow.
For more details, let's turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle.
Now, we are a couple of hours away from the last day of August, and surprisingly, for the first time this season, the morning lows lowered to below 20 degrees Celsius for Seoul. Now, the mercury is expected to stay low in the mornings and nights. However, we are going to see big jumps into the afternoon as we transition into fall. And on Saturday, the nation will have favorable sky conditions, especially across the northern parts of the peninsula due to the influence of high pressure front. Now, the morning will be chilly with some cool breeze from now on. Now, Seoul will be lingering around 19 degrees, so make sure to have a light cardigan to keep yourselves warm. And by afternoon, Seoul and Daegu will boost up to 29 degrees, whereas Busan will hit 27 and Jeju will peak up to 28 degrees. Now, while Saturday will see sunny weather, Sunday will be overcast in Seoul with precipitation expected in the southern regions. And also more nationwide rain is expected for next week. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that will wrap it up for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
News in Depth is next.